Hey, I'm Carr. What if I told you that a spiteful, violent, terrorist ideology has infiltrated our American society? That multiple groups under the umbrella of this ideology have taken it upon themselves to attempt to gain access to the very foundations of law and order that we trust to maintain the peace? These groups want to sneak in and plant the seeds of destruction and chaos, spread propaganda and twisted praxis, and encourage more and more violent conflict among the citizens of this nation. No, I am not talking about Antifa. I am talking about white supremacist organizations and the police. What is the largest and most deadly prison gang in the United States? You may be inclined to think of MS-13, or if you were alive in the 80s and 90s on the West Coast, the Crips or the Bloods. In fact, the Aryan Brotherhood holds the throne for the sheer size and brutality in the American prison system. This is a hardline white supremacist criminal organization that dates back to the 1960s, coinciding with the desegregation of federal prison systems. White supremacist organizations have a long history of inconsistency in their practices and ideologies, and the Aryan Brotherhood was one of the pioneers of this trend. While outwardly claiming to be pro-white and anti-everything else, they were often involved in the manufacture and distribution of heroin, often to white communities. Their notorious profit-seeking behavior oftentimes led them to collaborate with Mexican and Colombian criminal organizations. They often trafficked heroin and methamphetamines to other white people within their own communities, fueling addictions among the same whites that they claimed to be protecting. In addition to looking for any reason to attack minorities with extreme prejudice and brutality, they often enacted violence against other whites for being race traitors. The prison industrial complex will not make a concerted effort to curtail the influence of this organization. In fact, the correctional institutions will often benefit from the presence of criminal organizations in the prisons as they serve as a form of enforcement and control. Let one group run the yard, give them a little bit of influence, and that's less work that the prison guards have to do. Of course, you know what would also make for less work for prison guards? Putting less people in prison, you stupid. These groups don't just exist in the prisons. Many historic organizations like the KKK and the Daughters of the Confederacy have existed in society for over a century. Oh, and yeah, the Daughters of the Confederacy are definitely still a thing. They're the mothers of the Lost Cause myth, and Karens aren't a new phenomenon. The Charlottesville rally showed us that plenty of plain, everyday, khaki-wearing white men with 401ks and tiki torches were more than ready to take to the streets and spread their dangerous nonsense. And despite all of this, much like in the prisons, law enforcement agencies at the city, state, and federal level have little incentive to take action against a perpetuation of white supremacist ideology. Even though many of these organizations claim to go against the establishment, they don't actually prove much of a threat to law enforcement. In fact, there has been evidence to suggest that an infiltration of white supremacist groups into law enforcement is occurring across the country. Oh, and if you think that this is something new or out of left field, it comes from an assessment by the FBI, dating back to the Bush administration. White supremacist groups seek to foment chaos and racial disharmony, which they would then in turn use to carry out violence against minorities with impunity. Embedding themselves in law enforcement agencies give them further power to do this. This also, sadly, isn't new. Failed rock star wannabe Charles Manson painted divisive phrases on the walls with blood at the site of his murders in an effort to cause a helter-skelter or race war. Nowadays, you have white supremacist bad actors attempting to escalate the peaceful protests against police brutality in an effort to start a boogaloo. White supremacy is baked into the very power structures that make up the unjust hierarchy of American society. It is a threat that goes all the way back to the founding of our nation. So when you watch the news, wondering how an institution that claims to protect and serve could be so capable of such cold indifference and disregard for communities of color, remember that we have dangerous terrorists in our midst.